Hi everyone, my name's Declan McGlynn. Welcome to Friday Forum Live, Point Blank's weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from East London. Today we're exploring the depth of reverb and how to add space, width and character to your mixes. So today I'm joined by Point Blank Head of School, JC Concado, to give you a brief history of reverb, how it's evolved, and how you can use both vintage and modern reverb types to enhance your mixes. We'll only be scratching the surface of what's possible with reverb, so if you're thirsty for more, make sure you check out our mixing courses at online.pointblanklondon.com. And remember, we are live, so get your questions in for JC and we'll get to them throughout the broadcast. So welcome, JC.
Hey, Declan.
Another FFL.
Another FFL.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good. And you?
Excellent. I'm glad it's Friday, as always.
As always.
Bit of banter there. So anyway, reverb.
Reverb,
What's
yeah.
it all about?
What it's all about? Well, I mean, it's all coming from the fact that wherever we are, reverb is basically the environment.
Okay.
Wherever we are, we listen to sound in 3D, and the human is really good at being able to perceive what kind of space a sound is located in based on
the reflections.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know if any of you guys have gone into an anechoic chamber room, which basically is a room with no reverb, no reflection whatsoever. It's really, really and that's why in music you tend to recreate that as well, to put it in that kind of sense of space.
So it feels more natural.
Absolutely, yeah. And it all comes to, again, live music to start with. You know, before electronic music, there was live music recorded in a room. Therefore, this room would come as the picture. And obviously, studios are known for having better rooms than others. And, you know, producers, engineers tend to go to studio because this room sounds amazing. And that's the concept of reverb, you know. And obviously, after that, it became, we created artificial reverb, because we thought, hey, if we can locate and hear this reverb, we may as well recreate it, and then so we a bit of the whole, not history, but the whole. Yeah, let's look at the whole reverb concept basically. So originally, when you hear a sound, basically in a room, the first thing you hear are what we call the early reflections, and when we look at digital reverb and everything, you'll see that all those parameters are there for you to basically adjust. But the first recording, the way reverb was captured, was basically the distance from the microphones. You've got a microphone in a room, the closer you are, you've got more direct sound. Room sound being picked up by the mic, which is the equivalent of our wetness now. And if in like jazz recording, classic jazz recording, blue notes and all that kind of stuff, further away, the room starts to become clear. If you look at the course, I mean, again, we've got a whole lesson on both our mixing courses online and in the college on reverb, because it's such an important part. And I think a lot of producers, if you get that wrong, that's kind of what tells you that, oh, this track is not quite professional. It's one of the big mistakes. There's a lot of mistakes that can be done with reverb, I think. People are either overdoing it or not enough, and then you're lacking something or having too much of it. If you look at the concept of reverb taken from our course, we look into, you've got the direct sound, then you've got the kind of a delay between that before the first reflection comes back to you.
Like
and when we mean by reflection is your ceiling, your wall, you know, even if it's carpet, you're still going to have reflection. I mean, they're not going to be as clear. And it's, you know, it's about absorb. It's a combination. Reverb room is a combination of absorbing and reflective. And then you've got your first reflection that are the close-ups of the objects to give you, you know, if I speak here, we all hear a bit of reverb, Sam, you know, it's part of the sound. So that they are the first reflection that comes, and they're known as early or first reflections in a reverb. And then all those reflections that have come keep on bouncing, they don't stop here. And that's what creates the tail of the reverb tail. And those reflections becomes closer and closer, so that's what makes it sound that kind of smooth sound. And then after that, obviously, the characteristic of the walls, how they reverb, that's going to be brighter or duller. So if we go into the concept of space in music and depth a little bit, if we listen to first a room sound, you know, with a mic, that's how it started. Before there was no reverb in the 50s yet. All we used was the room. And typically, like I said, further away or closest. So here's a quick taken from the course, a drum placed with the mic quite far away, so you hear the room as well. Yeah. And typically that's become a classic sound, you know what I mean? The Led Zeppelin sound. You tend to have this room heavily compressed, the microphone room heavily compressed, and just to bring it up, and it's part of that kind of sound. After that, one of the first kind of like fake built reverb were what we know echo chambers, magical rooms. And the concept of it was suddenly having some controls over it, what was going into it. So suddenly it wasn't about capturing that sound in the room, it was about with the mic and do a balance of direct and wetness. It was, okay, I'm recording the direct sound and I can add some reverb. And basically an echo chamber was a room, really reverby room, usually tiled. You put a set of speakers in there, send the sound that you want the speakers, and have one or two mic to capture the sound. I took some pictures of that from the internet, just a quick one. That's one in a studio in Berlin, so you see speakers are somewhere behind. Here are the microphones picking up here the sound. Maybe make it a little bit bigger if you guys can see better here. So that's the microphone, that's an echo chamber room. Abbey Road has two rooms, classically in the 60s. Story goes, you know, Beatles used to go in the echo chamber to have a sneaky joint, and then suddenly would be hit by a sound of a snare drum coming at them, bang, you know.
Ouch.
Yeah, exactly. So those that was the kind of first artificial reverb as such as controlling. Okay, I'm dosing how much reverb I'm putting on the sound. Then we moved on, and you can hear we do it in the college as well, where we've got a nice reverby staircase, and here is an example of a snare being sent into a speaker, recording into a mic downstairs in the corridor at Pont Blanc. And we do that in the lessons because we thought it would be interesting for students to to discover that. And again, I would really suggest that something is not only for live music. I mean, electronic music. I think you could send synth or percussion, whatever, white noises into that. Just create your own. Suddenly you've got something a bit unique.
Put it in your shower.
Showers are great for that. You know what I mean? Bathrooms are fantastic. So that's kind of and then after that we move on to, after the echo chambers, we started to create fake reverb, and the two one in the 70s, late 60s are spring and plate reverbs. A couple of pictures here. The plate reverbs are pretty awesome. They're a huge piece of wood, but pretty much as wide as those two tables together.
2 meters maybe.
Yeah, and it's a big metal plate in there. Sound is captured in the plate. The plate vibrates. I mean, I'm keeping it really, really simple here. What I loved is the wheel on the top of it, as you can see here. You're moving the wheel to change your time. So from 1 second to 5 seconds.
So that would tighten and loosen the plate.
Yeah. After that, we had a remote control for those. And those reverb are still very much sought after by engineers. They've got a classic sound to them. They're very much, we'll look into it a bit in a project in a while. The spring reverbs, that's one classic British spring reverb in a long tube. And what you have inside, instead of a metal plate, you have a spring reverb here. It's a bunch of springs inside. Again, you make them more tighter or looser, giving you, that's a homemade plate. String reverb. Spring reverb works great on guitars, and they're all in guitar amps. They're very favored by guitar players. And they're known as well that when you knock them, you get that big, huge in dub. You know, it's a huge dub effect, stuff like that. So those are your kind of analog reverb. So we can start opening a project. I've got a project here. We've played that project before, I think, on the mixing for vocal. And we're going to start moving into a plate simulation. So I've got that somewhere. I'm going to open the mixer here. Yeah, here's the UAD plate simulation from Ocean Way, I believe it was convoluted. And you've got 3 of them. They're becoming warmer and richer. This one is the thin, kind of more toppy one, thinner one, medium in there. And here you see the remote control. This is how you change the time. Plate reverb are still very much favored in electronic music so on strings, piano and stuff like that, works a treat, you know, let's have a listen on the strings. So going into the plate, that's without.
Very lush.
Very lush, bringing you...
Metallic almost.
You see the detail of it? I mean, plate reverb is probably the most used. It's still in digital reverb. Because of that characteristic, it seems to work. It really works in the mix. It brings a shine, but at the same time a warmth to it. It just really works. And after that, we went into digital reverb. So digital reverb, you've got the first digital reverb was the EMT 250, and it's remarkably really sounding great. It's an 8-bit digital reverb. Again, same manufacturers of the EMT 140, but the 250 was the big one with the big red levers type of vibe. It does phasers, it does a lot of different stuff, and rear output. Yeah, it's got a lot of really good stuff on it, and that pretty much was for the 80s and 90s digital reverb. The classic ones would be the Lexicon, and we look into all of that through the project. And the Bricasti M7 is the luscious, the most expensive one. Again, we're going to come back into that. So here's a project, and how I use everybody. People tend to use reverb. Is the danger with reverb is if it's about making it so it gels together, recreating a sense of space, you know, as if a band, and even with electronic music you tend to do that. The idea is to bring everybody, all the instruments in the same space. So when do you listen, you're kind of like, I'm understanding the snare seems to have that kind of small reverb, and the strings are, you know, that because that's how our ears have been educated. So the basic for mixings tend to be a small room for percussion and a larger room for your vocals. Usually that's your beginning of a setup. And here's an example of that. That's why I've taken that track, just because that it's not fully mixed, but there's a basic of it. And you can see here we've got drums. So our drums are there, and I'm gonna solo them from here maybe. So we get the reverbs and the whole thing. Kick, and if I mute the reverb, okay, there's a bit of reverb on the drum loop.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm gonna drum. Okay. So there's a bit of reverb on the drum loop. If you mute it, see? And that's your typical digital reverb, small room. Here, the kind of parameters on the reverb are, again, the idea of digital reverb. They were trying to recreate. There are many more parameters that you would have on those analog reverbs. You know, you've seen the plate. It's hardly anything. You choose the time and the pre-delay, pretty much. The pre-delay being between the direct sound and the first reflection. It's a way to separate a little bit that and still getting a bit of the direct sound, if you like. The parameters on the digital reverb, the screen is really small, but those Logic plugin, I can make them bigger. So the pre-delay is for that. The room shape is obviously changing the shape of the room, as you can see here. I'm not going to go too much into the room size is an important parameter. The room is. And then the wet and dry, obviously. So because it was actually on a Nox, it should be fully wet. The reverb time is the decay.
Should it always be fully wet? Because
if it's on a Nox, yeah.
Okay.
Because then you dose. You've got the direct, and you dose. That's the correct. Again, I encourage people to use oxys and send and back and return for reverb. I've seen mixes sometimes where people put like 10 insert of reverbs, and for me the problem with that is it doesn't give you that kind of gelling together, because you'll get 10 different rooms. So it's suddenly starting to sound like the percussion player is in the bathroom and the singer is in the kitchen and the drummer is in the bathroom or the bedroom, and you know it doesn't make sense. So the idea is to get that kind of unity, and also just saving on CPU. You know, you can have 3 reverb instead of 10. The beauty of it as well means that you can EQ the reverb, you can start treat it differently, you can start panning things differently. They don't affect each other. So I think that's the way people tend to use reverb. And again, sending all your drums in the smaller room, all the kind of percussive maybe, and then the kind of lusher vocal string synths can go in the larger reverb. And with 2 reverb, you're pretty much there, and you're getting that kind of nicely unified sound to it. So. And then you've got the spread. The spread on these reverbs is the microphone, how much they're further apart, as if they were picking up the room. So that's what the spread function is. The density is, you know, once it's bouncing off, how densities. And the high cut is quite important, and the low as well. I mean, the concept of high cut and low frequency level is that a sound in a room that keeps on bouncing, the high frequency are absorbed quickly and first. Therefore, as the sound tells, the reverb becomes duller, more bass. So that's kind of that. So all those parameters, as you can see, now the spread actually is the stereo. The stereo bass is the microphone. Sorry, made a mistake. So correct on that one. And the crossover is the relation between the high frequency and the low frequency. It's a way to how they're split, again, because the way we reflect. So on this mix, you can see we've got the drums going in the small room, and pretty much everything else on auxiliary, what are they? Auxiliary 3. Yeah, 3 goes on a big reverb. So that's the plate that I've set up quickly here. And then we've got our vocal. Lead vocal is going to be there. It goes in 4. So let's see what's on this project. 4. Oh, this one is an echo. And 5. 5 is another reverb. So here I've got a string and a reverb. And as you see again, I'm using a convolution for that one, but it's still a vocal plate.
So it's mimicking a plate.
It's mimicking a plate. So we're going to touch on convolution as well. So convolution is the next stage after digital reverb. And I think it's fair to say that since convolution reverb have come, engineers use less and less digital reverb. I think digital reverb has a connotation. They were not great at creating a realness, if you like, whereas convolution, you record a room, put it in there. You've got less parameters, but you've got less of those kind of digital standing reverb.
But that goes back to plate, which had less parameters, just like time.
Exactly.
Although there's no time.
No, totally. So again, if you listen to the vocal, so you've got the delay and the plate. We could send it into the normal plate. One thing is important, I think, is the pre-delay as well, when it comes to longer reverb and how to use that. One of the mistakes I find with people working on vocal, and I'm going to make maybe an example. So I'm going to turn that reverb off, and I'm just going to put a plate just to illustrate, and also because we like it. Where is our plate? EMT 40 UAD, here it is. So I'm going to go there, so I'm going to make it fully wet again. So I'm going there, and it's auxiliary 5. So I'm going to make it a bit more prominent to kind of show you one of the mistakes that people tend to do with that. One of the mistakes people tend to make. Now, let's mute. Let's unsolo the drums as well. Here we are. That's for me the typical mistake people would do.
Overload reverb.
Overload reverb, but not quite the right time either. A bit shorter. So suddenly it sounds like somebody singing in his shower, you know, or in our shower.
That's got to be one of the most difficult things when you move on to working with vocals, is getting sit with a space.
And
it's
the
always
key,
that really fine line between too short and too loud,
totally.
too quiet and too loud.
And I think people don't realize that you can actually have quite a long time of reverb, because they're in the background, they're there, they smooth things out. So one first thing is important is the pre-delay. And one thing I would really strongly recommend is try to work out your pre-delays to make them in the tempo of your track.
Right.
It's kind of quite a cool way to everything moves in time, and it's nicer for me. It works really well. Use the calculation, whatever it is, I can't remember it by heart, but you know, you can find the delay time.
Delay time, yeah.
And the pre-delay start between 10 to 25 milliseconds. It's going to be a good to get that. And as soon as you do that, you're getting it. You see the separation? The vocal is already a bit not as. But obviously there's still too much of it. And I think in this case, we could definitely go longer, kind of a 2 between 2.5, let's say 2.5, you know, and we're going to have less of it. So let's put them together. Let's work on that together. See, reverb is quite long.
Baby, I'm yours to find. I close my eyes.
And it sits already way better.
Yeah.
getting that long thing. See, the reverb keeps on
Yeah.
going, but it works much better.
Sometimes when you if anyone's ever done any remix competitions on Beatport or anywhere else, you get the stems.
Yeah.
And when you're listening to a track, you don't actually hear the huge amount of reverb.
No, exactly.
When you listen to it by itself, it's
Yeah.
like
And
4
if you don't have that
seconds.
exactly, and that's what
Crazy.
gives you that kind of professional sound, that kind of depth, and you know, all that
it's
kind
kind
of stuff.
it's I think a little bit people who are a little bit more amateur producers would be a little bit wary of doing long reverbs because it's associated with cloudiness.
But
and
so they're going to make it,
messiness and mud.
yeah, and you've got to be careful because if you do too much long reverb, then you'll get the whole washing effect, and it's not a good sound either.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a balance of things. But so you know, if you don't have those kind of reverb, Convolution is a good way, and obviously Space Designer great, comes with Logic, brilliant.
And the Max for Live.
Yeah,
Convolution for everything is really good as well.
absolutely. I would really also advise. There's some Bricasti M7 Impulse. I know Kevin Carrigan, who did the trailer here, uses them a lot. They're free. You can download them, put them in Sound Design, in Space Designer, getting some great impulses of real quality reverb here, real spaces, churches, halls, for orchestration, for strings. Really.
We'll stick the link for that on an annotation on this video.
Yeah,
Let's try and do it.
Let's try. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll
It's not
do
gonna work,
it.
but hey.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Personally, one of my favorite convolution reverb is Altiverb. It's just something absolutely amazing. Space Designer is great, but as soon as you start listening to Altiverb, you're like, oh, I'm not going back to Space Designer. It just has that quality. Another digital reverb I came across that I was advised this morning by one of our tutors is Val Halal, I think.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, $50.
Very simple interface, but
Simple
sounds
interface, and it's going through all those parameters we've talked about, your pre-delay, your length, your density. Really works, worth definitely the $50. I think it's really good. So yeah, that's kind of your basic setup. 2 reverb, you've got your plate, your hole. Typically in a digital reverb, you're going to have the following algorithm. Room, your wooden, kind of jazz club, tiled, which is more bright and explosive, but
More slapback.
Yeah, and usually those are short time. What we define as a short room, people say, oh, what should I use as a time for short room? You know, anything between 0.5 to 1.5 is considered a short room. And you would be surprised how 0.5 can work a treat a little bit on acoustic guitar, on just to kind of open up that sound a little bit, a bit of air to make it more natural to us. The concept of hearing an instrument.
It is really important to stress that you've more than likely never heard a sound in your life that didn't have reverb on it.
No, never, unless you've gone into
to
an
bear that-
anechoic room.
Obviously, there's creative expectations when you're mixing. You may not want it. You want to be completely dry, but
Yeah,
just bear in mind that.
but that's why I think if you leave something dry, then it's going to really jump at you, and that's where suddenly you make a creative use of reverb or not. You know what I mean? And I think that's the whole thing. But no, you're absolutely right. It's vital to have that sense. So so what we wanted to finish today is go through some. So those are the basic. I guess let me finish showing the algorithm. So you've got the rooms or chambers. Again, chambers are supposed to, I suppose, emulate echo chambers. And again, you tend to use them for drums, percussion, maybe strings, but again, they tend to be smaller. So those are 2 algorithms that you use for the kind of smaller room. Then the larger one are going to be your plate and your hall. The hall is the typical concert hall, church hall, great for string, great for vocal, depending. Plate, classic for the on drum, on strings, on piano, on vocals. I mean, plate is probably the most used reverb of all time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The plate I've showed you before, the analog, the AMT 140 is still used on every single mixes. Put a fake piano into it, and suddenly it starts to sound a little bit more real. That's kind of what it does. So that's for, and then you've got your non-linear, classic non-linear from the 80s, the big kind of gated reverb that we're going to go into how to create one ourselves. Let's fake one quickly. So that's for your digital reverb, analog versus analog, and how to use them in your mix, basically. So I'm going to close that project now. Let's hide that. And shall we do some gated reverb?
Yes,
Maybe.
back to the 80s.
Back to the 80s, let's do that. It up already because we wanted to really kind of go into it, so I'm not going to... Yeah, there's one thing I'll do from scratch, we've discussed it. But so here we've done this very basic, it's kind of electro house. It's from our electro house course and mixing dance music course as well. So I've got a clap somewhere. Yes, and I did set up this Gate Reverb. So first I'm going to take it off. So that's the track. But now let's look at this. We've created a Gate Reverb and I will show you. So the way we've done that is sending into 14 here, going into Platinum Verb. I've taken a simple one. I've made it quite big on purpose.
Yeah, it'll never reach that 3-second time anyway.
No, because yeah, exactly. So here it is without the gate. And I wanted that so I could really make it so.
Although, you know, you could automate that gate to go off during the breakdown or whatever, and then put it back on when it drops. Yeah.
And then we've put a gate on it. First thing to do is I tend to trigger the gate with the original sound. So I've triggered the gate from the snare. I feel like I'm getting a bit more control somehow that way. So this is with the gate here now. And then you can start playing with your gate. You could even play with the attack.
Kind of has like an ebb and flow.
Exactly. So there's a lot of things you can do. And again, I've done it through an aux, so you can see the potential of it. I could EQ it, I could phase it, I could do whatever I want, distort it, whatever, compress it, you know. So that's your kind of gated effect, typical, very 80s sounding, blah, blah, blah. Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. So now, what I want to show you is one of those backwards, reverb backwards. It's a small effect. It's not as important as how you don't use it on every single mix, but there's something about it that works really well. And the reason I want to show it, because I've seen a lot of people doing it. I've seen a lot of YouTube tutorials, and I've got to say that's not the way to do it.
It's not the way, guys.
It's not the way to do it, I'm afraid.
You're promising a lot here, JC. It's better be good.
It's better be good, yeah, I know. Shit, I put myself under pressure now. Basically, back in the days, the way we reverse the tape, send the vocal into a reverb, but the vocal would play backwards.
Yeah.
So the vocal would be backwards. Send in, record the reverb on the spare track, put the tape backwards, and suddenly the reverb is backward and the vocal is forwards.
Right, so it's not the same as the tail being reversed.
Exactly, it's not the same. I see a lot of people, they make the mistake of just sending the reverb into, sending the vocal into the reverb or the clap, whatever you want to do it with, sending into the reverb and then reverse the reverb. It's the same. It's not as spooky.
Right.
You know, this vocal effect, do it, you're going to hear it, Depeche Mode, Personal Jesus, Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails, I mean, that's part of their sound, you know. Yeah. But I personally absolutely love that sound. Actually, before I open that project, I'm going to show you very quickly how it sounds on its own, just because that way it's going to be a little bit more effective. Quickly, I'm going to play it quick because it's a project I'm working on and it's the vocal are on their own, so sorry.
My beautiful trash, beautiful trash.
See the effect?
Yeah, so that's a very extreme example.
But you can
it can be very subtle.
Look. Something that really works really well. And you see the effect is not the same as just reversing. More that's happening to it. So I'm going to show you how to do that in Logic. That would be the tip of the day. It's very simple. Loading another mix here, taken from our mixing course as well. Okay, so here we've got this vocal here. I've bounced it quickly so I can do what I need to do with it. Okay, so I've already done, so sorry, because I had prepped, so I should have cheated a little bit. That's my vocal, okay? What I want is, first of all, if I was reversing the tape, first thing I need to do is...
Can we just hear the track with the vocal in
context? Of course,
right?
Oh sorry, yeah,
just so we can hear what it sounds like. It's quite a dry vocal.
Quite a dry vocal because I've taken all the
Okay.
the effect here
explains
because
it.
I wanted to show you how it's going to work, guys. But otherwise, still, I mean, it's not as dry as you think. Again, it feels dry when you listen on the solo. Again, it's one of those mix where, wow, actually, there's quite a lot of it.
Yeah. Do you think that reverb should only be heard unless it's a special effect?
Special effects, otherwise,
Right.
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
it shouldn't be too obvious.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it, that was the last point as a kind of recap, but yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So first thing we're going to do, so I'm going to cut all those effects just to show you how to do, how I'm doing the
Heard
stuff.
when it's muted. That doesn't actually make sense, but you know what I mean.
Well, no.
Noticed when it's
Noticed
muted.
the difference when it's muted.
Yeah.
When it's open, you don't suddenly say, oh, big reverb.
Yeah.
But when it's muted, you can like, oh.
Yeah, it falls in. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. So I'm going to go there, mute that. So if I turn the tape around, I would first, meaning the vocal is going to be reversed. So that's the first thing you need to do. The direct sound needs to be reversed. The one that is going to be processing the reverb, because that's how it used to work with the tape, being backwards. And there's something brilliant about listening to backwards
Sounds
vocal,
good.
surely. So what I'm going to do, because I want to record the effects on its own, I've got luxury, I've got tracks to do that, so may as well do that. So I'm gonna bring down the fader. That's why I took the automation off. And what I've done is I set it up as a pre-fader. So the vocal is down, the direct sound is down, but I'm still going into the reverb. And for this reverb, I'm going into, another classic
The 224.
224X Lexicon reverb, which was before the 480. Big classic in recording studios, big sound of the 80s on every single record in the 80s, really, and 90s, pretty much. Again, parameters are slightly different. Here you got the time, reverb time, mid and bass, so you control it again based on your reflection, whether they're more bassy or, so, you know, just to give you an example. So for that, I'm gonna go for about, let's say, so what are we doing now?
Okay, sorry about that, guys. Bit of technical difficulties, but
Are we okay now?
yeah, we're just gonna look back at the reverse reverb effect that we were in, kind of in the middle
So
of
shall
showing
I,
now.
shall I redo it again?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's start it from the start.
So I'm going to reverse the reverb, the original signal first. And let's solo that. Okay. Now we're going into the reverb in pre-mode. And I'm going to take, I don't want a dry signal. We do a bounce. And we're going to call it 3. This time maybe. Okay, here we are. And I'm going to bring the reverb. So let's bring 3 to be coherent. And let's bring it back here in line with that. And then what you need to do is put the tape back forward again. Reverse.
So that's the original signal.
That's the original signal, and I'm gonna do the same for the reverb. Reverse it. So now we've put the tape as it should, back in order. Let's get that to get a bit more space on the screen. And then now I'm gonna put that back here. I'm gonna put that back here, and the vocal should work.
Hello, hello, hello. Dance, oh, dance, oh, dance. Oh, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I don't get,
It's awesome.
I can't get bored
It
of
just
it.
sounds like Dave Gahan.
Yeah, as soon as you do that, it's so much part of the sound. So hope you got that technique now after 3 times.
Never get bored of it.
Never get, absolutely. So that's how the right way to do. And a last thing I wanted to show, we can discuss. Do we have time or?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, kind of a sound design kind of stuff. In dance music, I think now, people don't necessarily want to emulate a real, and I think on your claps and on your drums and some of the synths, you're still going to do this kind of little room, little thing. But there is a time where sound design becomes more part of the production process, fills up the gap or whatever, you know, there's a reason for that. We've got a little example that Danny J, for the mixing dance music, put together here. And it's kind of a dead mouse type of pastiche.
Classic demos.
Exactly. So I'm going to mute the reverb here and have a listen. Got that stab, and on its own it doesn't do much.
Well,
really.
it just sounds like a soft synth in Logic.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, exactly. But, and this time I've done it as an insert because it's a sound design. So I really wanted to see, look,
break
it's
the
valid, the rules. And here, going totally over the top, the kind of reverb time I probably never would use.
And how much wet is? Oh, you've got the dry and the wet. So
The
4
dry and the
inches.
wet, so
And again, automate that.
and straight away, but now we've got it.
Yeah.
So you see here, it's not about creating a real space
Or being realistic with
but whatever, you know, it's about, it's a sound design tool as well. And in dance music, I think big, huge reverb are being used a lot for that purpose on the kind of sound design tip, really.
Yeah, totally.
So that's kind of like our 9 tips.
And there was one about mono and stereo.
There's one about mono and stereo, and in general, mistakes and things like that. I mean, if it's really busy, some of our mixes we've seen, like the dance hall, for example, really, really busy. I think this is where if you start, if an element needs its own reverb, because I'm not saying you should mix with 2 reverb. At the end of the day, you probably, I end up always with maybe 7, 8 reverb, you know. This particular sound, I want that particular reverb, you know.
But even if you have those 7 or 8, you still send things to the room.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I do.
So they still belong there.
Totally.
As well.
There are times where this accumulation is starting to wash. It's
Yeah.
becoming a whole washy, and suddenly you want that big reverb, and it gets lost in that kind of huge stereo picture. This is where mono reverb can really help to get that kind of definition. The washing doesn't take over the whole mix. Typically on guitar, spring reverb, mono, same side.
Yeah.
Huge, huge long space on one side, but it doesn't disturb any space.
So will you pan your guitar 20 to the
For example,
left?
and put the reverb,
reverb
with it.
too?
Absolutely. And it's kind of like, you've got this huge space, but it's focused there,
Yeah.
leaving all the space to play with. And that's one big, for me, it's one big thing. Few things also, you know, in terms of reverb. The reason people don't use reverb like in the 80s with big obvious digital reverb, it's because I think engineers and producers have clocked on the fact that when you do that, you're kind of dating your mix a little bit. And nowadays, you know, there's a bigger electronic 80s revival going on, you know, that's been going on for a couple of years now. And when you do that kind of obvious digital reverb, it's because you want that flavor. But you know, if you listen to all those records in the 80s, what we thought sounded amazing production values, you know, like the Tears for Fears, the Trevor Horn, there's still something a little bit dated about those reverbs, you know, they kind of like, they belong to that time. And I think people have clocked on that. That's why now we've gone back to more natural convolution reverb or 60s that seems to have more kind of a timeless feel to it, I think.
Definitely more realistic.
Yeah, and more realistic, and less get in the way. Get less in the way, I think.
Cool. So we got quite a few questions. Do keep them coming, by the way.
Yeah.
We'll get through them as they come in. The first one comes from Merihin Sheepkins. Put in reverb on a group track or solo reverb for every single track? We've kind of covered that, but
Yeah.
you can just reiterate.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily, again, if I've got a bunch of BVs together, they all go to a bus, I may actually bus into a bit of reverb instead of doing it on separate element.
Right.
Unless it's not uncommon that, let's say I've got 6 BVs, 2 are harmony, mid and low harmony. I may put less on the low. Again, it's that kind of like low frequency reverb really messing the bottom end a little bit as well, you know. I'm not saying reverb on bass or kick, but be very careful what you do here, because you can really.
Would you recommend rolling off?
I would roll off, or I would do it if I've got the space to do it. If it's, but otherwise, yeah, roll it off, do it on the more kind of top, and get
Yeah, sure. Martin Vingman is wondering, can you tell him how to make a huge reverb without taking over the whole mix?
That's kind of like what we've.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's plenty
long,
of tips there, but yeah.
Long.
Just turn it down,
Turn it down.
but make it longer.
Yeah. One of the big mistakes, I think, also, because the idea of reverb is always to, there's this concept that the dry sound is there, stuck to your face, like, and it's great for vocals sometimes to have like a verse coming here, and then on the chorus you open up and things like that. I think one of the common mistakes as well is, I forgot what I was about to say now.
But yeah, we were just saying,
it's basically the reverb tends to push the sound backwards in the depth. So as soon as you put reverb, but one of the common mistakes people tend to think is that, if I make my reverb longer, it's going to push it back further back, and it's not the case. Making a reverb longer just makes it sound like in a bigger room. The kind of front and back in terms of depth comes from the amount of reverb against the direct sound.
Yeah.
That's
so the relationship between the auxiliary and the direct.
Absolutely.
Sound,
That's what gives you the kind of depth, how much in the back you're putting your source.
Cool. Sowick is asking, is there any cheap or free reverb plugins in the market that are worth getting?
Yeah, well, the $50 one I've mentioned,
Valhalla.
for $50, I mean, we're talking 30 quid.
I'm not sure the exact price of the Max for Live Convolution reverb, but if you do use Ableton, it's a really good option.
Yeah. I mean, the Space Designer in Logic is free, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Some as well, I've got to say, some of those simulations that Native Instruments have done since Complete 9.
The RC 24 and 48,
they're very, very good. They're very, very, so if you've got Complete, we tend to use Complete, Absinthe, Massive, battery, reactor, and we tend to forget.
I think they're €99 by themselves.
Okay, but they're really, really good quality. And it's the same for their compressor, the SSL compressor and stuff, we tend to forget that. They've done that now, and it's a new thing to explore, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Because they're very great.
Angel Kick's wondering how much of a reverb should be applied on the lead sound. So if you want a sound that's up front, it's the main part of your track, but it still needs to have a space.
Again, go back to what we've done, it depends on the rest of the track.
Pre-delay is important.
Pre-delay is important, so with the pre-delay you keep a bit of the presence, and the tail end with the rest of the mix, basically. One thing I think I should say as well, I should add, is try to be logical. If you have a 2.5 second reverb time, then you can increase your pre-delay. But try to be coherent. Smaller pre-delay with smaller time, longer pre-delay with longer time. There's a coherence here, otherwise it doesn't make sense. If you've got a 1 second, obviously have your pre-delay shorter always than your reverb time. You're not going to have a 0.5 reverb time and a pre-delay of 1 second.
Yeah.
It's going to sound really weird. But I've seen that people do that as well.
Right, okay. So that actually works.
Well, no, it doesn't. It's one of the... it's kind of weird. Again, if you do electronic design, sound
the
design,
rules are out the window.
The rules are out of the
Just do whatever
window.
you want,
But I'm trying to make generic rules about good use of reverb.
In mixing.
Sensible use of reverb in mixes,
Cool. Ronxus, I always get those names wrong. Would you use other effects on the same auxiliary with the reverb?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, you could compress the reverb, you could, like we've done with Gate Reverb. Sometimes I like to play with them, modulate them, put a bit of modulation. Some reverb have modulation, LFO built in.
Yeah.
Like the Halal,
like maybe a slow tremolo. Absolutely.
A bit of pitch shifting. The 224's got that as well. If you open up the advanced menu, stuff like that. I would. Also, when we go back to something I forget to say, I know we've talked a lot about what we wanted to include in that session today, guys. But one of the things, if you imagine you start with a short reverb and a long reverb on 2 axes, then you can start being creative and put a bit of the short, a bit of the long on the same channel. Typically on the vocal, a bit of short reverb, a bit of long reverb. Suddenly, you don't have 2 reverb anymore in your arsenal of your tools. You've got 3 reverb because you've created a third one by adding those 2 together. The third space, you know what I mean? But they still belong in the same space, so it works. It's coherent because you're using the 2 same rooms. You're just blending them together.
Exactly. We kind of already covered this, but would you put compression or imager, stereo imager, or EQ after reverb? I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
What would
compression
be a
is
reason to use compression and reverb? auxiliary?
compression. I would do it if I wanted to create that kind of fake big drum sound, for example. Normally, otherwise I wouldn't, unless I wanted to shape it a certain way. What was the other one he suggested?
Imager, stereo
Imager, yeah, definitely. To make something really wide, especially in electronic music, I think it's totally valid. If you need that kind of extra over the top, put an image enhancer, spreader, stereo tool, whatever, after your reverb. Yeah.
For sure. And we got one more from Nacho Stone, who asks, I think we covered this before in an FFL, but he says, what do you think about putting a little reverb on the master with a little bit of wetness? Put all the tracks in the same place. I think we did do it before, like a 2%, didn't we?
Yeah, you can. It can work. It can work. I mean, some mastering engineer, but then if that was needed, I would leave it to the mastering engineer. But normally, when I see mastering engineers starting to do that to a song, it's because something is not quite right in the mix. You would normally address
So it's a
that in
correction
the mix.
tool.
Yeah, you know. I mean, I would prefer, if you feel the need to do that, then replicate it by individual, and then you've got more control.
Bear in mind that if it will remove the transient effect.
Yeah.
Any amount of reverb.
Totally.
will reduce
That's
that.
the beauty thing about reverb. You know, few things about reverb. It's really taking the edge off of a hard sound. It's tuning. It's vocal, which is slightly borderline as soon as you put reverb.
Kind of smears it a bit.
Absolutely, you completely forget about it suddenly. Absolutely fine. You know, things like that. So that's another reason why you use, suddenly as soon as you use vocal, it feels more like a record if you use it well.
And we got one more. It's a perfect way to end it. What's your favorite reverb plugin, if you had to choose?
Altiverb.
Altiverb. Straight away.
Can I have two?
Yes, you can have two.
But if I have one,
Only
it's
'cause it's Friday.
Okay, I could do with the MT140 as well.
Yeah.
If I had only the MT140
But we heard
or the
the
MT250,
250 as well. And UAD 250.
I think any of those two, or the Altiverb, because it's a convolution, therefore I'm cheating. I've got the Altiverb even come with the cathedral from the town where I was born. So it's
Nice.
but yeah, probably Altiverb for convolution for. But if I had only one device, I would go with the MT.
One last minute one from Daniel Gibson. What are your opinions on the Lexicon PCM plugins versus the real hardware? He's talking about the Lexicon
the
release.
native. Not bad. They're not bad. Again, I've got to say, Lexicon throughout the 90s, because that was what was the best in the studio. I think we've got Convolution, the plate and stuff. I don't go to Lexicon as much as I used to. I think I'm starting to realize that they don't sound that, unless I want that kind of sound. You know, the 480, for example, gives you that kind of lushness and slightly over the top. But it works, you know, if you want that kind of.
I think those PCM plugins are pretty expensive, aren't they? So unless you're a die-hard Lexicon fan.
Yeah, if you're a die-hard,
You can
but
get
they
similar
are
options
good.
for cheap.
But they are good.
Yeah.
They are good. The plugins are good. You know, no, they are definitely up there. For a long time, I used to use only those, but I've gone back to now, kind of like plate and convolution, really.
Yeah.
Personally.
And just one quick point. Someone's asked, I've actually missed it now. Stoic says, turn the air conditioning on in the studio. We wish we could. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too loud. Fine, it's probably time to finish.
Yes, and get some fresh air.
Exactly. So hopefully you got some inspiration for the weekend from that. And if you want to know more about reverb and other mixing techniques, make sure you visit online.pointblanklondon.com to take a look at our mixing and mastering courses. We'll be back next Friday for a very special spooky deconstruction. So make sure you tune in next week. Cheers.